So there's kind of no paper for this title. It's a title of the talk. I kind of didn't want to scare people by talking about macro model only, so this really comes from the research that is quite new to me. I mean, really, it started in 2020, and in fact, 2021. And which relates to the ARC grant that we have with World Bank on policy modeling for aging in emerging Asia, Indonesia, and beyond. So let me just say a bit about what this presentation will be about, and that's really comes from so this kind of early output that we have from this work. There's three parts to this. So first, when we started with this, so we first look at data. We first look at household surveys, and so that's basically this first work, data work that we did, and that's been now published. The main focus there is for population data from United Nations. So it doesn't this doesn't relate just to the Indonesia, but Southeast Asian countries in general. And then in terms of kind of older people and labor force, we use RANS Corporation Indonesian Family Life Survey panel data, ranging going from 1993 to 2014. So there's 5 waves. We mainly focus on 3 waves, and I provide more details there. And it's looking like there's going to be a new wave coming. There's work that people doing or will be doing on this from ANU, from Crawford School. Now the second part here is policy work. So we did this work with Pip and John. And that's what's kind of important work for me, because that's where I really learn about how kind of undeveloped really the pension policy is in emerging Asia. Also how complex it is. And really what this second paper does, it provides a recent detailed review of pension policy in emerging Asia, and really goes beyond. So there's, for example, OECD at glance Asia focus. This goes beyond that. We focus on less countries, but we go into the details about social pensions as well. And what we do in this paper, we kind of run initial kind of projections for the proposed social pensions in Indonesia, just kind of to show that, if the pensions are modest, and by modest here, I have in mind, pensions that really target the poverty, absolute poverty. So the kind of the benefit level is very low. Sort of when you compare that with the age pension, about 30% average income, we're talking about 6.5% of GDP per capita here in terms of the benefits. And then really these two talks motivate the third paper here, which is the modeling work. Sorry, just skipped. And that's with John and Pitawat Pononkul from Bank of Thailand. So that's kind of the first modeling work that we did for this project. I mean, there is a working paper, and kind of at the moment we're putting more in terms of the robustness checks, whether kind of the policy that we examine and that we propose, whether alternative kind of modeling frameworks applicable to emerging economy in Asia in particular, whether that will kind of change the results. So in this talk, I will talk, half will be pretty much about sort of this data work that we did. And then sort of the second half will be the modeling stuff that we did and policy evaluation. So here, basically, on the basis of the data work, you get this motivation for the modeling work. And what we see in country like Indonesia and in general in Southeast Asia, you have undeveloped social security, public pension with low coverage. In many countries, there's no coverage for informal labor. And that informal labor, that basically accounts in many countries of around 80% of workforce. Okay, so 80% basically are not covered. And then you have very low benefits. That's for kind of those people who are covered on social pension in particular. High and persistent informality. So as I said, around 80% of the workforce informal, with share increasing significantly after retirement age. And that retirement age that kind of relates to this first point here in these countries is low. In Indonesia is 57 now, but it's been increasing. So already sort of, and I'm talking about here the formal sector retirement age. Also, when we look at the transition from informal to formal labor, that's low, around 10%, and falling significantly at older working age. Then you get low income derived largely from working and family transfer at older age. Okay, so low income at older age. And we have also now done initially work with asset data, and there we see very low savings over the life cycle. So the total asset actually that's not that bad, but you know, the home ownership in country like Indonesia is high. The total asset it's largely derived you know, from property, from residential home. Very low savings over the life cycle. And then sort of to this, you have this demographic change and population aging when we draw on United Nations data. And that's kind of create issues here with falling number of adult children and how that impacts the informal transfer within family from adult children to elderly parents. People living longer. So as I said, currently, many people derive income mainly at older age from working. So that's going to be an issue. And then you have kind of these fiscal macroeconomic issues with, you know, increasing age dependency ratio, falling support ratio. All right, so the objective, so this is kind of the objective for that modeling work. As I said, the first part of this talk there, the objective is to kind of document the stylized facts, you know, about emerging economy, and in this case, focusing on Indonesia, labor force, incomes at older age, and assets. But for the modeling work, you know, we focus on tax and pension policies. So kind of here we abstract from health. You may think of other kind of public policies aiming to kind of increase the welfare, particularly at older age. But also in this framework, you know, I'm talking about kind of macroeconomic models. We need to ensure that these policies are sustainable, fiscally sustainable for emerging economy. And you know, I already mentioned increasing retirement pension access age for formal labor, making sure that all kind of formal labor is covered by contributory pensions. But for the informal labor, we kind of propose non-contributory social pensions. So you may think of kind of similar payment that we have in Australia, but which much modest benefit. So here really we aiming at poverty alleviation. And you know, as I said, this is within kind of this macroeconomic frameworks where we can study these economy-wide effects. And this includes life cycle. So that's very important. So you really want to have in this model finite household with finite lives, and macroeconomics, general equilibrium effects, fiscal, and yeah, we can also well, that's one of the objectives, is to examine the welfare effects of these changes. And yeah, so we can also take this framework into population aging and run the demographic transition and see sort of how the policies performs, you know, under that framework. So here is the model. I will provide more details later on, but it's a macro model that incorporates life cycle. That's what kind of it's the main feature of this overlapping generation model. And in this case, we have formal and informal labor, and we kind of pay attention in particular to kind of calibrating this behavior of individuals in this model to the IFLS labor force and asset data survey. It's stochastic. There's bequest motive, consumption saving, labor supply, retirement decisions. And we have detailed representation of existing tax and pension policies in Indonesia, and we're able to capture these general equilibrium effects. And they not only come from changes in factor prices, but you may also think of changes in redistribution of bequests. And of course, the government budget is balanced in this case. And here we can account for long-run implications, but also short-run and transition part simulations. So in terms of the literature, that again, so this is that's related to the modeling framework, to the model, and the third paper. So I think the most closely related paper to ours is Song et al. 2015 applied to China. Here, kind of, we extend this to account for employment time heterogeneity. So we have this formal, informal. That's kind of the main gain here. And also in terms of the policy, I think really our contribution is in terms of the formulation of policy in emerging Asia, which I think it's different to what the policymakers trying to propose. As I said, in terms of so we basically targeting these formal, informal people with kind of different policies applied to each kind of given group. And in terms of the informal, I think that there should be a reorientation of the policy towards these non-contributory social pensions. And look, there is quite a large literature on pension policy and public policy in general and informality in emerging Latin American countries. And kind of I listed a number of papers here. Some kind of like Chung's paper here, they look at Brazil, and they kind of run exercise of extending social security to informal workers, labor. I mean, here, as I said, in terms of the policy, we're thinking of non-contributory pensions. I think that's kind of important. But just to kind of compare this to what we do, kind of what we do currently. Okay, so in all these kind of models, you have sectoral choice or occupational choice, between formal, informal, and sometimes they also incorporate self-employed and so on. So here we kind of at this stage we abstract from the choice, and I would argue here that we kind of need to think of different informal economies, and I see those in Latin America countries. They're quite different, the informal people there, than informality in country like Indonesia. I already talked about the persistency, so we see kind of very, very high and persistent informality. But there are different drivers, and I can go into kind of the details, but I don't have that much time. So what we see in Indonesia, it seems kind of that the choice applies to Latin American countries. The regulation taxes, that matters. It matters much less in country like Indonesia, where kind of you have this dual type of formal informal economy in place. All right, so that's basically the first part. I don't know whether someone has a question or not. I can stop here. Whether people can hear me. All right, so I proceed. I hope that people can hear me. I just kind of see
We
only
can,
team.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, that's good. All right, so first I will talk about the microdata. Okay, so that's just coming back to the title and drawing on IFLS labor force income and asset data. Then I talk about this micro approach, and I may not have much time to go through details, and just want to talk to you about what I plan next. Okay, so what's important here is there's this RANDS Corporation done together with Indonesian University household survey, Indonesian's family life survey, running back from 1993. There's 5 ways. We mainly focus only on 3 ways here. And what really matters for the empirical work that we do, and also for the modeling work, is kind of definitions of formal, informal. And here, kind of, we draw on the International Labour Office definition. So they kind of define informal employees as those not subject to national legislation, income taxation, social protection, entitlement to certain benefits, other with non-fixed premises and size less than 5 employees, and pretty much all self-employed. So there's kind of broad definitions on the whole page. They explain, our definition is all self-employed, so that's the same. There, in terms of employees, so there's this indicator whether employees has or hasn't have any health insurance or medical expenditure. So employees with no health insurance or any medical expenditure from employers sort of are included into that informal kind of definition. Now, of course, it's more likely. Okay, so it's more likely that the employer may have this health insurance or a medical expenditure, any medical expenditure from employer, but may not be eligible for the contributions to Social Security, to pensions. Okay, so but I think, and the other thing sort of that I should say is that so now there is a compulsory requirement that all sort of formal have kind of this health insurance. So eventually, kind of in terms of the employees, we should have all coverage here. And kind of we look at these 3 ways. Now, there's also different definitions. People kind of compare formal and informal sector when they look at firms, whether they register it or not. So there's been other studies on that. So this is kind of what we used, because we're really kind of interested in pensions and income at older age. So here kind of we make the following restriction for our output sampling. And look, we include males only. And that's kind of quite significant. We also did sort of males, females together. That changes quite a bit. So against with females, the informality increases quite significantly. So we have here the age of formal workers range 20 to 54, and the reason for that is that 55 for most of the sample was the retirement age, and there really you see small numbers after that age. So pretty much everyone is informal, those who stay in workforce. And these are kind of other changes. So this is the remove those with hours work less than 10 hours per week and more than 19 hours. So this is kind of standard way of how people deal with outliers. What I found quite interesting is that what also matters in emerging economy is kind of irregularity of hours. So if you kind of look at those working less than 15 weeks per year, compared to those working, 25 weeks and more. So that matters as well for the average hours. So I was quite surprised. I always thought that sort of informal works more hours than formal, but that's not the case, particularly if you include those with irregular hours. If you include those working less than 15 weeks per year. So that was quite interesting. In terms of high skill definition, this is also different to kind of OECD classifications of what we use for Australia. I mean, in my model for Australia, we use definition of high skill of those with bachelor degree and above. And kind of if you look at HILDA 2001 to 2018, now the average based on that definition is 30% of population aged 20 to 65. Okay, so here we wouldn't get the numbers, of course. So we use those who completed high school as those. So 12 years of schooling classify as high. And I should say again, so the mandate was that everyone now has to complete high school in Indonesia. But still kind of the average years of schooling, when you look at data, OECD data, that's less than 10. Okay, so that's less than 10. It's about 9 or something. So still quite low. But this is kind of what we use just thinking about the model calibration. So the model really kind of replicates the economy where eventually Indonesia will get, I think. So this is the composition of workforce that we get. So there are these basically 4 types: formal, low, and high, informal, low, and high. And this is the different ways, and overall, that's kind of the pool data. So if you look at overall, sort of you can see that 23% of the workforce in this kind of based on our definition, I should say, is formal, and 76.9, 77 is informal. Also, what you can see within the informal, most of the workers are low skill, whereas in the informal, most of the workers are high skill. Okay, and you can also look at kind of when I talk about this persistency. So if you look at here, 2000, the differences are not that big. I mean, what's changing is the skill distribution of the workforce. That's kind of what you can see when you compare 2000 with 2014. But it seems that sort of the in terms of the formal informal, that proportion has not been changing that much. So we look at the earnings. These are kind of normalized here. So again, we have these 4 types: formal low, formal high, informal low, informal high, and everything is normalized for informal low at age 20. And so I should say kind of all these kind of diagrams, they get fitted into the model. Okay, so there is 2 objectives of this work is just to on its own, it's interesting to kind of document the stylized effects and how they differ from developed country. That kind of was interesting for me, but also the objective here is to calibrate the model structure, the household behavior, to these observed targets from IFLS. And here kind of what you can see, it's almost 9 times bigger basically between informal low and formal high. Okay, so this compared to this, so quite significant gap here. I mean, in Australia, just when you compare, I think it's about 3 times, 4 times. So this would tell you something about inequality in earnings. And these are kind of the hours, so you can see that sort of informal low, they tend to work less than formal. Quite interesting that formal kind of low are working the most here. And as I said, what matters here is kind of this minimum week restrictions on working. I was quite surprised. So when you kind of eliminate these restrictions, then you really get sort of informal law, the average hours falling. So it seems to me that they kind of work irregular hours, low irregular hours. So this kind of this diagram would be a target. That's a target in the model to kind of replicate. Now we also kind of look at this employment transition. So what this table shows. So we observe people in 2007. So I should say with these waves, they're 7 years apart. That's kind of an issue. So it's not like Hilda. This is 7 years apart. So we can observe people in 2007. Okay, whether they were formal, informal, and this is kind of their age group. In what age group they were. So here kind of that would be 25 to 49. So you're looking kind of the aggregate impacts here. And then we observe the people in 2014. And what you can see that sort of, about 70% stay here, formal, 27 informal. There's a transition to no job. So you can see kind of there is a transition. Okay, there is a transition. But here, kind of, I would argue it's not by the choice. It's kind of people just get unlucky because if you look at their earnings, so if you compare, so the earnings are almost half here when they kind of switch into informal. Now here, when you look at formal in 2007, so again this average about 11 transition into formal sector, so yeah, so that's kind of what I think that's quite small. And you can look at the transition by age. Here kind of you can see that at older age, this transition from informal to formal drops. So really it mainly happens when people enter the workforce, and that's probably driven by kind of increases in education. And we also calculated income data at older age, and that's kind of, this includes whole sample, so that includes females, and so this is a percentage of average earnings. So 70 plus 15% declining. And here kind of you get composition, income sources at older age. And really what you can say is kind of the main two components is the labor income, particularly at younger ages, and then at older ages where the total income declining already, these are the transfers from children. And we did some kind of preliminary work. I kind of put this together on Monday. So so this is very raw and kind of needs work, but this shows average households assets using asset questionnaires. So first, what we did, we connected the asset questionnaires. It's kind of it's the correspondent. The answers are provided by not the household head here, but the person who kind of replies to all these questions. Okay, it doesn't have to be the household head, I should say, but we could link. We basically managed to link this data to the labor force survey, so we can kind of see their employment / skill attainment. Okay, so we can kind of create the same table as I show you for the labor force, where we have employment, and I should say this relates to 2014 wave. Okay, so we also pull the data together so we can derive the asset holdings across all three waves. But here I use 2014 wave. So you have formal, informal, low, high, and these are their assets. The property is really kind of the major component of the total asset holdings. If you look at savings, this is very low, extremely low. We're talking about 1 million Indonesian currency. So, I show you kind of some of these labor supply, the labor earnings data, and this is extremely low. So by saving some in deposit at the banks and other stuff, other kind of financial assets, there's also receivables. Even if we include all financial asset, on average here you get to about 7. 7, and the average income, it's about I kind of need to check, but it's about 30,000 or something like that. So 30 million per year. Okay, so these are very low numbers. So for macroeconomists, I mean, these numbers, I just would like to see them as a percentage of average income. This number would be something like five times. Okay, and that's kind of that's lower than what we have in Australia. It's much higher in Australia. We can also look at the life cycle, so how that looks. So you have average, low skill, high skill, and we can also look at sort of older ages, like 65 and over. But we just need to clean the data. So there are some sort of outliers, but you get hump shape. And here it seems kind of it doesn't include debt because they kind of still start here with some total assets. Okay. So how are we going with the time? So I still have time. So I'm going to start talking about the model.
Hey, George. So we probably got about 12 minutes. Then we want to move to questions.
Oh, okay. All right.
And speaking of questions, Raf had a really good one. So you mentioned that when people move to informal work, that it might not be by choice because we see the earnings also drop significantly. But I wonder if you have any data on whether the hours are also dropping, because maybe they're moving to part-time or more flexible work arrangements.
Yeah. Look, we can look at it. So we didn't look at that, but yeah, as I said, I was quite surprised. I saw that sort of informal. They work long hours, and it's not the case. There's many informal that work, low hours, very irregular hours. So I kind of don't think that so the average hours would kind of increase there. I mean, we see this transition, quite a big one, 27% from formal to informal. So I would think that people would go kind of more from permanent work to more irregular work, given sort of the drop in earnings.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, so these kind of are the main features of the model. There's the household sector, firm sector, and government sector. Within the household sector, we have informal, formal labor. Now, what's important here is that kind of we calibrate that behavior to what I show you, but we kind of assume that the shares of these 4 types, formal, low, formal, high, informal, low, informal, highs, are basically fixed. They're not impacted by the policy. That's the main thing. So they're not impacted by the policy at this stage. I mean, you will see in one of the robustness checks, what we do, we allow kind of there's an exit rate, and we play with these shares, just to examine the course of the policies that we're examining here and we're proposing in terms of the social pensions. But in the benchmark and this kind of the baseline results are derived by keeping these types kind of fixed. So think of this kind of like inborn ability with which people enter the model. Other features otherwise kind of quite standard. I'm not going to go into the details. There's a bequest motive. So this kind of so maybe I'll just show the constraints here. So these are the constraints for the formal and informal workers, and you can see for the formal it's much kind of more complex budget constraint here because it includes, the policy, the pension policy. So there's a contributions. There's a contributory pay-as-you-go pension, and there are benefits that people derive that are linked to their former earnings, and also there are taxes. And we have this three sort of sources of taxes. There's the labor income, capital income, and the consumption tax. And this is the kind of informal. Now, what we do here with the taxation, I mean, the income taxation only applies to the formal and the capital income taxation. In terms of the consumption, here we have kind of only one composite good that is produced. Okay, so there's no good separate for the formal and informal. But what we do, we kind of impose minimum kind of consumption that is not taxed. Okay, so there is a progressivity around consumption tax. So that's kind of how we go around this two consumption good model. And the thinking behind this, and that would be good if kind of I can get comments on this, is that you may have formal guy who goes and buy informal goods, and he pays the same amount of money for them, and that's not going to be taxed because of the low value of that informal goods. But the formal guy also are more likely to go and buy a TV or something that is kind of more value, and that's kind of going to be above this exemption, and that's going to be the tax. And same for the informal, but of course that they don't have resources in terms of to do these kind of bigger expenditures. So this is kind of what we do, and then we kind of calibrate the model to this IFLS data, but also to macro data. And for the demographic data, we kind of use the inputs from United Nations population estimates and projection when we kind of run these population aging or demographic transition simulation. So there's lots of parameters that I use as inputs to the model. So these are kind of, you can have a look at it, and then sort of the benchmark models produces outputs. So this is kind of the simulated data that we kind of, I should put the data target, how closely we target these. I'm not going to go into the detail, and the same thing, we can derive when we aggregate across the individuals for the macroeconomic indicators here, expenditures and macro calibrated targets for the hours and capital output ratio, and the government policy. All right, so two type of solution can be derived from this model: long run steady state, when we kind of compare the two environments with different policies, and then sort of transition path when we move from one steady state, the initial one, to the new steady state. And there are short-term implications, medium-term implications, long-run implications. Now, just kind of very quickly, this is kind of what we do in terms of the policies. And really the main focus is kind of overall pension reform, incorporating all these pillars, all these kind of policies. The main thing here is really that we targeting formal workers with these two policies that's been already implementing, that's kind of being implemented in Indonesia. And then there is this proposal on non-contributory social pensions. And in the overall reform 5 here, we kind of use a means-tested social pension alternative, drawing kind of on setup that we have in Australia with the age pension. But as I said, what's important is that there's a very small kind of social benefit, pension benefit, 6.5% of GDP per capita. And you can get kind of the welfare impacts. I'm kind of not going to go into the details. So this is under the case where you don't assume, you abstract from population aging. You assume that sort of the population structure basically will be the same over the transition. And the way kind of how we produce the results here, so the reform is implemented in 2020-24. And you have basically on this axis different generations, old and currently alive, and then sort of future born generation. So this minus 80 would be kind of the long run welfare impacts, average, formal, informal. And kind of you can see that the biggest winners really are here, the current old, and they benefit from these social pensions. That's what you can see in this segment, the plot D here. All right, and then kind of we go to the demographic transition. I can talk how we implement that, but I kind of leave that for questions maybe. But this is basically what we match. We match the increases in old age dependency ratio over time here. So you can see that currently in Indonesia, the old age dependency ratio just about 10%. And that will increase by more than 5-fold. That's what the projections are. And yeah, so this is the means testing. Maybe I stop here and we can open for questions.
Great. So, thanks, George. Oh, sorry. Okay. Go ahead, mate.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, just kind of just looking at this is quite important. So this is kind of how we model the means test, and this is kind of how the means test is modeled in Australia. I mean, it's approximation, but the objective kind of here is to calibrate the taper rate and this minimum disregard, so we kind of replicate the proportion of age pensioners in Australia, or the people aged 65 and over, independent regarding their sort of pension payments. So we kind of use what we have in Australia, apply it in this kind of Indonesian context. Now, of course, the maximum benefits is much smaller, and in this case, it's 8.1% of GDP per capita, and that's kind of used as an alternative for this policy 4, when we give the non-contributory pensions to all informal. Okay, so under policy 5, we apply means test. We increase the eligibility to everyone, okay, but we use that kind of means test. That means that some people are removed, some people have lower pensions, but some people have higher maximum pension. And here, kind of, this is under population aging. You can see the projection for the cost of these social pensions. That's in percent of benchmark GDP. So very kind of, it's to me that's very low, okay. But of course, in case of country like Indonesia, there you have to think that government expenditure is 10% of GDP. It's not like 20% like in Australia. And we kind of look at the welfare effects and so on. All right, I think I stop here. We have some kind of extension here in terms of model modifications. And I really like kind of the 2 and 3. The 2 is kind of model with self-employed, which is kind of following modeling of entrepreneurs in entrepreneur models by Kitao. And the third one is we're working on sort of modifications with exogenous employment skill transitions. But again, these transitions are not impacted by the policy. That's kind of all right. So I stop here.